Sometimes the moment you discover something troubling about a person, your first instinct is to confront them. You want answers, you want clarity, you want to say, I know what you are doing. But what if I told you that sometimes confronting someone too quickly doesn't reveal the truth? Sometimes it teaches them how to hide it better. Think about that. You tell someone, I've noticed that every time I disagree with you, you make a joke at my expense. And suddenly the jokes stop. Wonderful, right? Maybe they genuinely didn't realize they were hurting you. Maybe your conversation created awareness. But maybe the disrespect didn't disappear. Maybe it simply changed its clothes. Now they don't make jokes. They exclude you. They become passive aggressive. They withdraw affection. They make comments to other people. Or they become incredibly careful around the exact behavior you've identified. And this is where many of us make a mistake. We assume the behavior stopped, therefore the attitude changed. Not necessarily. Sometimes confrontation produces transformation. Sometimes confrontation produces adaptation. And if you don't know the difference, you can mistake someone becoming more careful for becoming better. Today, we are going to talk about that difference, because not everything you notice requires immediate confrontation. Sometimes you need to establish boundaries. Sometimes you need to leave. And sometimes you simply need to stop interrupting the information you are receiving. Welcome to Thriving Miriam. Let's go deeper. The moment someone knows they are being observed, something changes. Imagine just sitting with someone who constantly talks badly about other people. Every conversation eventually becomes gossip. They reveal secrets. They mock people's vulnerabilities. They tell you things those people probably trusted them with. Eventually you say, I've noticed you gossip a lot, and it makes me wonder what you say about me when I'm not around. What happens next? They may reflect. They may realize you're right. They may apologize and genuinely change, but they may also simply learn, don't gossip around Miriam. Those are not the same outcome, and that's why discernment requires patience. Because when you immediately announce everything you've noticed, sometimes you remove your ability to see what the person naturally does when they don't feel watched. This doesn't mean secretly testing people. It doesn't mean setting traps. It doesn't mean playing psychological games. It simply means you don't have to comment on everything you observe. Sometimes information is enough. You saw it, right? You heard it. You noticed the pattern. You can remember it, and you can adjust accordingly. Now, this is where I really want you to pay attention, because two people can change the exact same behavior for completely different reasons. Let's say you tell two people, when you speak to me like that in front of other people, I feel disrespected. Both stop. Same result. But internally, completely different things may have happened. The first person thinks, I didn't realize I was making them feel that way. I need to do better. The second thinks, okay, so that's what bothers them. I'll make sure they don't catch me doing that again. Externally, both changed. Internally, one developed awareness and the other gathered information. And this is why I want to give you 5 reasons people sometimes change after being confronted. Reason 1, understanding. This is the healthy one. Sometimes people genuinely don't know. We all have blind spots. We all have habits that affect others differently from how we intended. A healthy person can hear, that hurt me, and think, I didn't realize that. Tell me more. They don't immediately turn the conversation into a trial. They don't need to destroy your credibility. They don't spend 30 minutes explaining why you shouldn't feel what you feel. They become curious. They want to understand, and that's a good sign. Not perfection, receptiveness. Reason 2, respect. Sometimes a person doesn't fully understand your boundary. They might even disagree with it, but they respect you enough to honor it. That's maturity. A person doesn't need to experience the world exactly as you do in order to respect your limits. You can say, I wouldn't personally be bothered by that, but I understand that you are, so I'll respect it. Healthy relationships don't require identical feelings. They require respect for separate realities. Reason 3, fear of consequences. Now, things become more complicated. Sometimes behavior changes because the person realizes, if I continue doing this, I may lose access to this person. Fear of consequences isn't automatically bad. Consequences are part of life. But pay attention to whether change exists only while the consequence is close. Have you ever watched someone become wonderful the moment you are ready to leave? Suddenly they communicate, right? Suddenly they are attentive. Suddenly they are doing everything you've been asking them to do for months or years. And you think, finally, they understand. Maybe, but ask yourself, why did understanding require the threat of losing you? And more importantly, what happens when they feel secure again? Because temporary improvement during a crisis isn't always transformation. Sometimes it is emergency behavior. Reason 4, image management. Some people are less concerned about what they did than they are about what you now think of them. Notice the difference. You say, what you did hurt me, right? And instead of focusing on your hurt, they become consumed with proving, I am not a bad person. I would never do that. You know me better than that. That's not who I am. Why would you think that about me? Now suddenly, you are comforting the person who hurt you. The conversation has shifted. You started by discussing behavior. Now you are defending your identity. Be careful here, because accountability would ask, what did my behavior do to you? And image management would ask, what does this make you think about me? Those are different concerns. Reason 5, adaptation. This is the one people often miss. Some people don't stop problematic behavior. They refine it. You tell them what you noticed. Now they know what you are watching. So next time, they are more subtle. And this is why repeatedly explaining every single detail of what you're observing can sometimes work against you. You are essentially giving someone a map of your awareness. Again, I'm not telling you to become suspicious of everybody. That's not what I'm saying. Some misunderstandings should be handled with healthy communication. But if someone has repeatedly shown dishonesty, manipulation, cruelty, or deliberate boundary violations, you don't necessarily need to keep teaching them how you are detecting it. At some point, stop providing tutorials. The first conversation and the 10th conversation are not the same. This may be one of the most important things I say in this video. People deserve communication. They deserve opportunities to understand. They deserve room to make mistakes. But there is a huge difference between they didn't know and they know, but they keep doing it. If you've never told someone that something hurts you, communication may be necessary. But if you've explained the same thing repeatedly, carefully, kindly, angrily, tearfully, patiently, and nothing changes, you may no longer have a communication problem. You may have an information problem. And the information is this. They know the first conversation can create understanding. Then repeated conversation reveals willingness. Sometimes we keep explaining because accepting what the pattern means would require us to make a difficult decision. So instead, we have another conversation and another and another and another. We keep searching for the magical combination of words that will finally make someone care about something they've already demonstrated they are willing to repeat. And at some point, ask yourself, am I still communicating or am I negotiating with a pattern? 4. Stop confusing an explanation with a change. You see, some people can explain everything. Ask them why they disappeared. There is an explanation. Ask why they lied. There is an explanation. Ask why they broke their promise. There is an explanation. Ask why it happened again. Another explanation. And explanations can be legitimate. Life is complicated. People make mistakes, right? But here is the danger. A convincing explanation can sometimes give you emotional relief without giving you behavioral change. You feel better because now the situation makes sense. But 3 weeks later, the same thing happens and another explanation arrives. Eventually, you have to ask, how many explanations does it take before I call this a pattern? Because understanding why someone behaves a certain way doesn't obligate you to keep experiencing it. You can understand someone's wounds and still have boundaries. You can understand their childhood and still say no. You can understand their fears and still protect your peace. Compassion and access are not the same thing. 5. Sometimes silence is not weakness. It's information. Some of us were taught that strength means immediately confronting everything. Someone says something disrespectful, call them out. Someone behaves strangely, question them. Someone lies, expose them. But there is another kind of strength. The strength to observe something without the need to immediately prove that you have observed it. The strength to think, interesting, and keep watching. Not because you are planning revenge, not because you are gathering ammunition, but because you are allowing the pattern to become clear before making a decision. You don't need to attend every argument you are invited to. No, you don't need to correct every false assumption. You don't need to expose every contradiction. And you don't need someone to confess before you are allowed to trust what repeated behavior is telling you. Sometimes silence gives you something confrontation cannot. Uninterrupted information. Please don't turn this into a game. This is important. I don't want you leaving this video thinking, Miriam said never confront anybody. No, that's not what I'm saying. That would be terrible relationship advice. Healthy relationships require communication. If someone hurts you and you care about the relationship, speak. If someone crosses a boundary they need to know existed, communicate it. If you are confused, ask. If you need clarification, seek it. Do not expect people to read your mind, and don't secretly create tests just to see whether someone passes them. That's not discernment. That's manipulation wearing the cloth of wisdom. The question isn't, should I confront or stay silent? The better question is, what does this situation require? Does it require communication, a boundary, distance, documentation, professional help, or simply accepting that you've already received enough information? Wisdom is knowing the difference. 7. Watch what happens after the conversation. Now, here is what the truth often appears. Not during the confrontation, after it, when the emotions have settled, when the apology has been given, when they believe everything is normal again. What happens? Does the change remain? Does the respect remain? Does the accountability remain? Or does the old pattern slowly return? Because anyone can behave differently for 3 days. The question is, what happens when they no longer feel watched? Real change doesn't require an audience. No. Real change doesn't need you to constantly threaten to leave. Real change doesn't require you to keep reopening the same wound to remind someone that it hurts. Real change becomes a pattern of its own. 8. Don't announce every decision. Here is another form of quiet power. Sometimes after seeing enough, you don't need a dramatic speech. You don't need to say, I am going to show you that I know exactly what you are doing. Sometimes you simply adjust. You stop sharing certain information. You reduce access. You stop relying on promises that have repeatedly been broken. You stop putting yourself in situations where the same behavior can continue hurting you. And sometimes, yes, you leave. Not to punish them. Not to make them chase you. Right? Not to teach them a lesson. But because you finally understood something. A boundary isn't what you force another person to do. A boundary is what you decide you will do when a certain behavior continues. And that is power. Quiet power. Now, this is the question I want you to ask yourself. If there is someone in your life you've confronted over and over again, ask yourself, what am I still waiting for them to understand that their repeated behavior suggests they already understand? Sit with that. Maybe they genuinely need another conversation. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe both of you need to communicate better. Or maybe you've explained enough. Maybe the next step isn't another speech. Maybe it's a decision. Because there comes a point when repeatedly explaining your pain can become a way of postponing what the pattern is asking you to accept. Final thought. Not every troubling behavior means someone is secretly manipulative. Not every mistake reveals hidden motives. Not every relationship problems require walking away. But when something becomes a repeated pattern, pay attention. Communicate when communication is needed. Set boundaries where boundaries are needed. Give grace where grace is appropriate. But don't confuse endless explanations with progress. And don't assume that because someone learned how to stop doing something in front of you, they necessarily changed what is happening inside them. Sometimes confrontation creates understanding. Sometimes it creates respect. And sometimes it simply teaches someone what you're watching for. So don't only ask, did their behavior change? Ask, what changed underneath the behavior? Because temporary behavior can be managed. Character reveals itself through consistency. If this video spoke to you, tell me in the comments. How many times should you have to communicate the same boundary before you stop explaining and start making a decision? And if you want to learn how to understand people more deeply without becoming suspicious, bitter, or manipulative yourself, subscribe to Thrive with Miriam. Here, we are learning something deeper than how to expose people. We are learning how to recognize patterns, how to protect your peace, and how to make wiser decisions about who gets access to our lives. Until next time, you don't have to react to everything you notice. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop interrupting the pattern and let it give you the information you need. Thank you for watching. Do well to subscribe. Bye.